So I probably have enough stuff to talk to you for about 10 hours, but I've already been warned. Good morning.
Good morning.
So attracting talent, we're going to get into that. I can't not ask you, though, especially when one of the topics we're talking about is growth, ask you, with MasterCard having such a vantage point on the global economy, on global consumers, how are we doing?
Well, we're doing differently in different countries, and we're doing differently between what we're doing in London and what we're doing in sometimes the rest of the country here. And I'm sure that you're all seeing that. As far as MasterCard's concerned, we're a big global company in over 210 countries. Our market cap's about 270 billion today, which is quite a change from what it was when we IPO'd in 2006. It was 5 billion. Which just goes to show that investment bankers at the time didn't know how much payments networks were worth. But I think that they've caught up quick. And there are so many fintechs out there today that are building things to piggyback across our networks. And I think that is a really exciting time. We've actually worked with 16,000 fintechs, and we help incubate fintechs. So it's about, a couple of thousand a year, depends on what geography we're in. So things are
no
moving.
recession?
Well, yeah, there are recessions in different countries, but of course, I think, in terms of global growth, what we're doing is replacing cash. We're replacing cash with digital payments.
Right.
And there is a huge secular shift everywhere in the world to do this. And still, 85% of the transactions in the world that you and I would do in our everyday lives are cash. So the opportunity is massive in this space. And that's why the growth, and that's why the market cap.
So we're here to talk about talent. I do want to ask everybody to pull out their phones. I do have a quick question. What's most on your minds when it comes to your workforce? And if we can bring that poll up, the choices are, so what's most on your minds when it comes to your workforce? Attracting talent, creating a diverse, inclusive, and supportive workforce and culture, retaining talent, and workforce, what are you kidding me? Too busy with everything else. I'm curious to see what everybody has to say about that. And as it comes in, all right, retaining talent.
Yeah.
And we know that there are extreme costs with retaining talent. Does the group have it right in your view? How do you see it? If you had to prioritize this list, what would you do?
I would prioritize retaining talent as well. Well, it's hard to prioritize these things because it's, you really need to attract the best talent in the market to be out there, delivering the best products and services. But more and more, especially with the younger people, you have to create a diverse workforce to attract the right talent in the first place.
Right.
And then you have to create a culture that actually retains them.
So let's talk about attracting talent. How do you do it at MasterCard? What are the skills you value? What are you guys looking for? And what are the applicants looking for? Because I do feel like, and I tell folks that come to me if they're looking for a job, I'm like, you're interviewing where you're working as well. So I'm curious what your thoughts are and what you do to attract talent.
Yeah. So we're fortunately in a position of being an employer of choice all over the world. And I think one of the reasons for that is that our culture is very good. We believe in decency. We think that everybody should have the opportunity to grow. And of course, we're in a tech business, which is highly desirable. One of the things that's a problem for us being in a tech business is actually recruiting enough women to be the software engineers of the future.
Are they just not there?
They're not graduating from universities enough. I think the figure in the West is about 17%. I think it's higher in China. And the issue there is that just not enough girls are staying on and doing science at schools and going through to universities. So we actually run programs around the world called Girls for Tech, where we bring in girls like 10 to 14 years old into MasterCard and say, hey, it's cool working for a tech industry.
10 to 14 years old?
Yeah, because we think that's the age before they stop dropping maths and before they stop making all of their school selections and so on. So we think you have to address it that young. It's like creating great sports people. They start really young.
And is it about 400,000 students that you've been targeting this way?
Or? We've reached 400,000. We're targeting 1 million. Yeah. It's a really good program.
What's the most important thing? Because we had one individual, and forgive me, I forget your name. Was it Eric? Yeah. Talked about some of the different ways when they bring someone in, and one of the things they do is they say, bring your favorite t-shirt. There's some different interesting things. What is it that you look at? Is it the CV that you still go to or their background, or what is it that you look at to get the core of somebody?
Right.
I'm just curious, what is...
Yeah, I mean, when we're doing entry-level recruitment, I mean, obviously we're out across universities and business schools around the world, and we're actually looking at, you know, what we think the potential of the person is, what's their personality. To a certain extent, you know, skills are a given, and skills can actually be taught.
Yeah.
But, you know, are you the sort of person that's going to be enthusiastic, interested? Are you going to embrace the culture? These things are really important, and we do that not just at university level, but we bring back people who've been out of the workforce for a while. Quite often they're women, but sometimes they're men. I mean, my husband was a trailing spouse, as they say, so he had to re-enter the workforce. He was a school teacher. It's a great way of hiring people sometimes in their 30s and 40s who have absolutely the right personality, attitude. Maybe they need their tech skills brushed up, but they've got another 20 years of productive working life ahead of them. And also, if you recruit people at this level, you have a better chance of getting people to go up into senior management, you know, if you retain them.
Well, this is interesting, too, because I love that you bring back people kind of at their mid-career point. But the entry level is important in terms of diversity. And let's just talk about men, women. 50-50 when they're coming in at the entry level.
Absolutely.
Hands down, there's no ifs or buts.
No.
You guys do it at MasterCard.
We definitely do that. We definitely do that.
So what happens? So you're 50-50 at the entry level, but you told me that about 39% are women across the company.
39% overall.
Why does it break down?
Well, you know, when you start going up into senior management, the funnel starts to narrow, and we're asking ourselves that question: is it because women are leaving to have families? You know, what are we doing in terms of flexibility and this kind of thing? And I don't think that, you know, we have a general answer to that question, but we're looking at how do people make the first move into management and the second move, and how do they actually get up through the ranks. And that has been hard in every big company. By the way, we're not a massive company. We only have 15,000 people around the world, which, considering when we're in 210 countries, shows you that we're super automated because we're connecting with 27,000 banks, about 50 million endpoints around the world. So we're not an HR, we're not a people-intense company when you look at our tech. Yeah.
What do you think, in your view, and someone who has been working for 40 years in the financial sector, sorry.
Are you trying to display my age?
No, I'm
No.
impressed with
Actually, I haven't been in the financial sector 40 years. I've been in it 30 years.
Okay.
And I was an engineer. I was a research scientist, mathematician, and engineer before
my father, an engineer. Predominantly, though, if you go back, right, it was a lot of men. So tell me a little bit about your experience in terms of biasness that you experienced, what that taught you, what you learned, and how you're applying it to MasterCard to make sure that there isn't that, whether it's in hiring or bringing people up the corporate ladder.
Well, I mean, when I was an engineer, I was the only woman engineer in Newcastle at British Gas's research station. And actually, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you're very noticeable.
You stand out.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an advantage, let's face it. On the other hand, things don't work very well for you. So when I decided to become an offshore engineer and do my training course in the North Sea in April, they threw me into the water off the coast of Yarmouth. The man's suit that they gave me, which was the extra small size, I was even smaller than that. Bear in mind, I was in my 20s and a lot lighter than I am now. And quite honestly, the water just gushed through the back of the suit, and I nearly died of exposure. So they had to create a new wetsuit for me, a dry suit, actually, a rubber suit. There's a good story. I did leave it on the train on my way to Charing Cross. I was living at Bexley Heath at the time, left it on the 836, together with a tin of Marvel, that powdered milk that you put in your coffee. And I went to the lost property office and said, I've left my bag on the train. And he said, yes, madam, what did it contain? I said, a rubber suit and a tin of powdered milk. And he said, what was the powdered milk for? But thing that really got me about this story is that I read the other day that women astronauts, there weren't enough suits for the women astronauts. And I thought, my goodness, it hasn't changed in 40 years. It's amazing.
But this goes into a conversation you and I had. Is it the book Invisible?
Yeah, Invisible Women.
Invisible Women, about how the world's just not designed for women. Yeah, crash dummies weren't designed for us, so we have more accidents. I mean, they're fixing that now. Microphones weren't designed for us, so we sound kind of squeaky. In fact, I was told when I was younger, just speak with a deeper voice and then you're going to be okay. It's a Henry Higgins syndrome, you know, why can't a woman just be more like a man? Just adapt. Move your blooming ass. Oh, sorry. So talk to me about diversity versus skills. So tell me a little bit more about how you view diversity and how you, when you're hiring someone at MasterCard, how do you layer them? What's most important? Is it you layer skills first and then diversity on top of it? And before we do that, pull out your phones again, because I have another question. Yeah. When hiring, I'm curious about all of you. The priority is, one, best person for the job, diversity first. Half the time skills matter most, half the time diversity matters most. We don't have a plan. And we'll see as these come in. So how do you...
Best person for the job is always the way that we would hire. But I think that what you do is you try to create something which is a balanced slate, a diverse slate. You try to get people from different backgrounds. Obviously, you're looking for the right sort of skills for the job, but as I said, skills can actually be taught. Yeah. It's really, you know, have you got the best person for the job? And I can see that that's, you know, that is the most dominant answer here. I would expect nothing less. And by the way, you know, if you talk to anybody who, if you talk to young people today, by the way, they hate the whole idea that anybody's being classified. Don't classify me as a woman, and don't classify me as a minority group, and don't classify me because I've got a disability, and don't question whether I'm this gender or that gender. They absolutely reject that. So all of this stuff that, you know, we've been doing in our generation, here's a person that looks like this, and here's a person that's diverse like that, they don't like it at all. So, you know, we're going to have to rethink this.
But I agree with you that, I don't know how everybody feels about this, but we constantly at, you know, offices put people into groups.
Yeah.
The women's group, the this group, that, versus, and how do we expect everybody to assimilate and kind of work together if we constantly do that?
Yeah. But, you know, the other thing is that if you've got an imbalance, then you also have to address it. You have to address it somehow. So, you know, especially when you're running the company, you've got to make sure that, you know how to change things.
I'm curious what you think about ethnicity pay reporting. Do you support something like that?
You know, I began not supporting it, I'll be honest, and I think, you know, we were together at a tortoise event where I was saying, hang on a minute, you know, one of the guys that works for me, his father's Iranian, so he's half English, half Iranian. He married an Indian woman, so what are his kids? You know, this is back to, does anybody want to be classified these days? Right. Having said that, I do think that if you don't measure anything, then you're really not aware of what the gaps are. And I think at that particular tortoise event that we were at, there was huge gaps, not just gender pay gaps, but pay gaps for people with disabilities were enormous. Right. And they do measure that. It was measured only for men, but still. I guess being a mathematician, I believe in measurement, or a statistician, I believe in measurement.
Yeah, I do. I think numbers and math.
Yeah.
Let me get you to an end. Maternity, paternity leaves. This really struck me, that if you really want equality when you're hiring somebody, if you have equal maternity, paternity leaves for someone, you're not going to look necessarily at that woman and say, I'm going to lose her for 3-4 months or whatever it may be. But if it's equal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing about paternity leave is, have you created a culture that says it's okay for, and it's usually the men, but it can be same-sex partners, but is it okay for the dads to stay home with their kids? Or, you know, and in our firm, 80% of the leave is taken all over the world. And that is telling you that the culture works. And I agree, it levels the playing field. First, it's good for the kids, it's good for the parents, but I also think that it levels the playing field a bit, that you aren't looking at women differently from men. But, you know, I also realize that in small companies, this must be very, very difficult. you know, dealing with things like these leaves. And I do think
there's
that
a cost.
Yeah, there's a cost, and I think that the government should be looking at the whole social infrastructure and what support they give to business from birth through to school, actually, because I think, for example, here in the UK, to go to work when, you know, you're living in London and you've got a small child is really very difficult. You're paying a fortune for it. You know, I actually paid for a nanny in order to continue my career, and I could have had a childminder. Most of us don't live near our parents or extended families these days, and so it's a real thing that I think we should think about as social infrastructure.
I want to ask you about corporate boards, and I'm jumping because I want to get to things, but you co-chair the 30% Club in terms of women on corporate boards. The target was meant to be hit by 2020, was reached ahead of schedule. You made a point of saying, a big point of saying 30% is the floor, not the ceiling. Why should this number be a baseline?
Well, there's a lot of research that shows that once you get to that level of 30%, then whatever group that you've got starts to become the norm. You know, if you're sitting in a room of sort of 10 guys, it's funny, you know, if there's a couple of women, could be you and me, and you're completely different to me in every respect, but they could get us confused because we're just other. Right? We have a few more women in the room, then you cease to become other. And it's the same with other groups as well.
And I mean, the research that's out there, I want to just throw out another poll to everybody about in terms of performance. From 2005, pull out your phones if you could, from 2005 to 2011, companies with one woman or more on their boards outperformed those with no female board members by how much? Your choices, 7%, 12%, 18%, 26%. I'll tell you the answer. But Anne, it's not just about the right thing to do, but the research continues to show you that in terms of performance, and the answer, correct answer, by the way, is D. It's 26% over 6 years, and that includes the financial crisis based on relative share performance. I mean, there's a financial
payoff. It may
payoff.
well be showing that these companies anyway are enlightened and they're going after the best people for the jobs and so on. You know, it's not that you suddenly stick a couple of women on your board and suddenly you're performing so much better than the market.
Right.
The truth is that you're a company that actually thinks about this. I think that's what that measure is telling you. But these measures are real. And I've seen things on the S&P that's, you know, 400% on a study of 50,000 companies over 10 years. And I'm a great believer in data because I like to see business cases for things. I don't like to think, you know, oh, we're just doing this because, you know, there's got to be a business case.
I do want to open up to questions. So please, if you have a question for Anne, I think we've got mics around. Please just stand up and do your question. Anybody have a question? Out there in the back. They're getting a mic to you.
It's a bigger room.
It is a big room. It's a great room. Everybody's got some really wonderful observations. Just quick, say your name and your company.
Mike Connor, apps broker. So I've got a female managing director. She's awesome. I've worked with her for 15 years. She gets approached an awful lot to make board quota. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's my strongest retention approach is actually just to hire her because she's awesome. But she's been for interviews, she's spoken to me about it. And at some point during a 4-interview process, someone would mention quota. Mm-hmm. I'm just interested in whether you had the same experience and actually whether it's the same people being churned.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we don't have quotas in the UK. If it's for a UK board, certainly we have them in Germany and France. Most places in the world, they're not quotas, they're targets, but people could use the same term. But quota actually means something completely different. I've never been recruited, I don't think, to meet some sort of quota, and I certainly wouldn't like it. And most people that I talk to feel exactly the same. Not most people, everybody. Everybody wants to think that they're the right person for the job, whether they're the most senior or the most junior person. So I actually don't really believe in quotas myself. Having said that, you know, I can also see that if you're just not getting any change to occur at a country level, you know, for instance, in Germany, you might take a different view.
To nudge it along.
Yeah, and your comment about people rotating around, I have heard of that in Scandinavia. really, really small markets there, though, you know, like 5 and 10 million people, 5 million people, and a small percentage of business people. Here in Britain, I don't think that that should be a problem.
Another question? All right, just to wrap it up then. Oh, please. Oh, right there, go ahead.
Peter Finding from Taylor Ventures. Do you think we should focus on inclusion rather than simply diversity? Diversity is very hard to define, and you end up with people in subdivided groups, as you mentioned, whereas inclusion hopefully leads you to diversity.
I completely agree with you, actually. I think inclusion is the thing that you should really focus on. And I think in every form. And, you know, some of the things that I hear, particularly in the startup industry, is in the tech startup industry, they'll say, well, I can't get any programmers. And I'll say, where are you recruiting from? And they say, well, Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, Stanford. And I go, well, that's your problem, isn't it? You know, they're not even thinking of including all the great engineering universities and so on. So I think it applies to everything.
That's a good point, though, Anne, right? Expanding where you're recruiting from, because people tend to go back to the same places, and then you get the same types of people.
Well, the guy who founded Slack, you know, he's British, and he actually went to Birmingham University, which, you know, for all of us, look at the demographic of the room, and you'll all know that as the Poly in Birmingham, probably, a lot of you. And his company is a great example because he's gone out across America particularly and recruited from many different schools and has a very diverse workforce as a result.
Makes the difference. One last question, please.
I just had a comment on the whether you should fill the quota. Like I'm in tech and I get asked to speak at conferences all the time because I'm a woman. In fact, they don't even hide it. They say, well, we don't have any women, so can you speak? And at first I got absolutely kind of like, I felt annoyed and upset about it. But then I realized if I didn't speak at that conference, and if they didn't have another woman, or if they had a woman that weren't as good at speaking, I wouldn't be helping for the next stage.
Yeah, well, that's very different from getting a job because you're filling a quota. What you're doing is being a role model. And I think you absolutely should do that, and you've got to make time for it, and it's very exhausting doing that all the time. And you know, you've got to get the balance between your day job and doing that, but I think it's very worthwhile. The world needs role models. The world needs sponsors. In all of my career, the people who helped me were men, because there were only men there to help me. And, you know, and they were absolutely fantastic. A man promoted me on maternity leave. A man recruited me to the C-suite. A man recruited me to my first board position. A man recruited me to be chairman of the clearinghouse. So, you know, we need sponsors and we need men to help us.
So men aren't so bad. Men aren't so bad.
No, men are great. I'm married to one. I've been for 43 years.
On that note, Anne, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.